Now, moving on to the particular method of decision making, okay, this one requires fair amount of preparation and effort from the group. This one would be especially with decisions that would affect the whole community in a manner where it's either a change of mission, or we need to let go of a previous mission, or uh, an entirely different way of structuring themselves also. Okay. One classic example right now of that would be the Sisters of the Hijas de Jesus. They have approached me and asked, JP, there are only a few of us left in Asia Pacific, the active ones. About 65% of us are already in our retirement house. So we are only left to these number of sisters, and we have so many schools, not just in the Philippines, but all throughout Asia Pacific. So how do we go about the decision process to let go of certain things if needed? What exactly would be the will of God for us? So this is oriented towards decision making, really very important decisions to change things. Another case would be that of the Discalced Carmelite nuns. They have to adopt their own, they call it the orans, their way of governing the different communities around the world. And they had to go through major decisions on some reforms in the way they will continue to live as Carmelites. And in fact, Pope Francis back then warned them, there is one thing for you to be careful about. Be careful with your attachments with nostalgia. That's what Pope Francis said. Okay. So that's something that is encouraged, especially when we have to make major decisions as a community. So the manner of preparation for this is different. Okay? So it's very important that as facilitator, you are clear with how to proceed with the decision process. Okay? Be very clear with what is being sought and what will happen if unanimity is not reached. Let's say there is no clear answer for everybody, then do we settle for a 2/3 proposal? Or do we need a text to be approved? What will be our approach for a decision? Because we cannot afford to stall a major decision. Okay? Second, it has to be done by the person responsible for the process, the one who calls together the group for common discernment. So this is the facilitator. And as much as possible, the facilitator here would be somebody outside the community. So there is some level of objectivity to it. Okay? Third is, depending on issue at hand, get a moderator from outside the group and the convening authority also. Okay? So somehow this becomes a team. It's not just you as a facilitator, but you need more objective discerners of the whole process as well. And then all communication will be in common, avoiding an exchange of opinions on the topic to be discerned. I'm sure Ian would have lots of stories about, some members of the community that you cannot find when it's time to come together. Now, I'm sure you also have your own respective experiences on those when major decisions are being done. And some people cannot be found when it's time to decide something. So preparation here is much more, has to be much more firm. Okay. The precise object of the deliberation must be very, very clear. Okay. And all the information for the decision should be in place, and there should only be one object of the deliberation here. Okay. So it's in my experience, this has to be, if I am the main facilitator, I have to be in constant discussion with the major superior or the head of the parish. In the case of Sacred Heart Parish in Cebu, when they asked me to help the pastoral council, because the situation in Cebu was, they used to be a personal parish for the Filipino-Chinese community. When you talk about personal parish, it doesn't have a jurisdiction. It only, people from the Filipino-Chinese community from all over Cebu can just come over. Okay, so they don't have a particular jurisdiction or like a parish delineation. But during that time, the council was convened because, number one, that particular parish was created as an archdiocesan shrine. So a lot of people would flock to the church. And another situation there is that they were given a jurisdiction of urban poor in front of their parish, which is demographics-wise, it's a huge gap between those who have been coming there. Okay. So they have to discern, how do we blend cultures? How do we operate as a parish differently? And that's a major decision for them, because the ways of doing of Filipino-Chinese wouldn't be the same as that of the common Filipino. Okay. There is enculturation that is involved there in the parish. So the way they will need to operate the parish will need to change. So it's very important that the object of the deliberation will have to be only one. What are we meant to become as a parish? Where are we being called by the Lord as a parish at this point in time? To go through that, they went through the steps. No? There is presentation to the group of the topic and method of the deliberation. So participants share their personal views of where the parish is going. Second, there is prayer and reflection to bring to light the motions and reasons against the proposal. Afterwards, these are written down. It helps if each participant inwardly accepts that this will be the result of the election and to look for reasons that support this conclusion. Just to differentiate, this is not debate, because so much holy indifference is being asked of the participants. Here, you assume a particular decision, and let's focus of the pro first. And maybe you can spend half of the day just focusing on the pro, and everybody will assume that this is where we're going. In the afternoon, they will have to consider the other side of which is to think of what are the reasons why we have to consider everything that is against. So, contributing the fruits of the prayer time, there is no debate or dialogue, just listening. Okay. Time is allowed for everyone to take in all that has been heard about the reasons against. Okay. So, you have to document what has been discussed. Nowadays, that's not a problem anymore because you can use a recorder and have AI summarize everything. That's very, very helpful nowadays. But you need a team to handle this. Okay. You need a team to handle the whole process for this. Next is prayer and reflection on the reasons and feelings in favor. It helps if each participant inwardly accepts that this will be the result of the election and to look for reasons that support this conclusion. And then group sharing of what has been experienced in favor of the proposal. There is no debate or dialogue again, just listening. Then time is allowed for everyone to take in all that has been heard about the reasons in favor, and you have to document. So what this is saying on a step-by-step basis is spend half day just talking about all the reasons why we're against this proposal. And then the next afternoon, let's all talk about all the reasons why we are for this proposal. Because as we put ourselves in the reasons in the morning against, in the afternoon for, we can discern some more where the Spirit is inviting us depending on what's coming up in the experiences of the people when they consider this. So there's also give time for personal prayer to make everybody's decision before the Lord based on what has been thought about, both the pro and the against. Prayed over and heard. Each participant becomes aware of their own openness, their disponibility, and to seek what the Lord most desires for them. Now, further in another round, and you will see that this method is becoming more complicated because you have to go through several rounds. Each person shares their decision after prayer. If there is unanimity, the common decision is accepted. If there is no unanimity, what has been previously predetermined during preparations will prevail. A decision by consensus could also be sought. So it's like going through the conclave and selecting a pope. You have to go through certain voting process in this manner. Okay. And then you need some time for confirmation of a decision. So the group takes personal prayer time to reflect on the process, to confirm the decision taken, sharing of confirmations that people have found, feelings and emotions that confirm it. Subsequently, the authority on whom the decision depends accepts the result and proceeds according to what has been agreed. Okay. So this is going through a whole cycle of conversations where you consider very well your options. We also consider very well the reasons for and the reasons against a particular decision. This one takes time to design because this is highly dependent on the context of the community as well. Okay. So maybe one similar process that this somehow I experienced is with the Myanmar region. We had to spend 8 days. The first 3 days has to be all about praying, going through a retreat, recovering the very principles of a Jesuit mission first. And then the process for discernment in common follows for the next 5 days also. And it required a number of conversations. There were several temptations to debate during the process. But the group opted to listen first, allow the process to unfold, even in moments where they could not see any answer at all. But allow the Spirit, trust the Spirit to surface what is best for the community. Okay. For us facilitators, that will be challenging. We will be given moments where in the middle of the whole process, we ourselves wouldn't know what possibly can come out of the process. But we have to trust the Spirit as we go through this.
What I'd like to present to you is really, if you are thinking about setting up a discerning group, these are some of the things that you need to kind of take into consideration. So a little checklist kind of thing, so to speak. And there are 9 of them. And this is based on a longer article, and that article will be in the folders. But this is a bit of a summary. So an Ignatian approach to good decision making in leadership involves more than calculating the benefits and the losses entailed by different ways forward. That's the discernment. It's a commitment to listen carefully to the different movements at work in the organisation or the group, to the point that some decisions are ultimately based not on projected outcomes, but rather on a sense that a certain way forward coheres with our sense of who we are under God, while the alternative does not. So it's that basic question, where is God leading us? Okay. Some of this will be a little bit repetitive of what's already been said, but it's an Ignatian repetition. And so, once before I talked to you about the fruits of the Spirit, we really need to be aware that the protagonist in the discernment processes is the Holy Spirit. So ultimately we are listening for the Holy Spirit. You can see that in Galatians 5. So the first one, choose the matter well. We've been emphasising the importance of having a good question, but also to remember that not everything needs to be discerned. You're not going to discern whether you go to this supermarket or that supermarket today. No. And there are some things in an institution, for example, that are left at an executive level. But when it comes to the bigger decisions in an organisation about starting something new or shutting something down, that is matter for discernment, or restructuring of an organisation. That's matter for discernment by the bigger group. So we always seek and find God's will in important matters. Good discernment depends on having a precise knowledge about the matter to be decided and about the result that is to be expected from such a complex, demanding process. So expectation of a result, it will be one or the other. It's usually a choice between, oftentimes what makes it difficult is a choice between two goods. Yep. So choose wisely. The second one is know who is to take part. And this is almost a discernment itself, to decide who is going to be part of the process, who's going to be involved in the discerning group or whatever. You need to choose carefully because, as we said earlier on today, not everybody has the capacity for this. And it's also, it's not a matter, sometimes when we put boards together, say for a school, well, we find somebody who's got some legal experts, somebody who's got economic expertise, someone who's got educational expertise. We try to have a balance of the expertise that are needed to run a school. So sometimes you need to think very carefully about who you're choosing and why you're choosing that person. Okay? And sometimes it's good to have a balance of a wisdom figure and a young person. A mix can be helpful as well too. So, establish clearly which person will participate in the process, discernment, why they participated, and under what conditions they will do it. So you need to establish clear boundaries and a clear mandate to them. Think about interior freedom. To be detached from your own interests. If you don't unload the baggage that you're carrying, you're going to fall over. This guy's clearly about to go over the cliff because he's overloaded himself. So it's not always easy, but we come to a discernment process as free as we can. You don't come with a plan that you've got for the outcome. You don't come to represent a particular group. You come freely to listen to the way the Holy Spirit moves in the group. So that's important. union of hearts and minds. This is really important to try and establish this in the group. So you might need to do some work beforehand. And you need to develop a shared sense of purpose, that people are on board here, and they are willing and generously willing to give, commit themselves to this. Because if you're choosing somebody, you need to have a guarantee from them that they're going to commit themselves to the work, because it is work. And to commit themselves to the full journey, not to be pulling out in the middle of it. This is really important. All right. Knowledge of how to discern. Now, this will involve formation. Before we had the Plenary Council in Australia, there were 250 people involved in that process. I was asked to do the formation for 250 people, and it was during the pandemic, and the only way we could do it was through Teams. So we had all these people online. We had to have these expertise there in how to manage teams and stuff like that. And so I gave them input on discernment. I gave them input on spiritual conversation. We practiced it. They broke into groups in teams and stuff like that. And it was interesting. Teams is a far better process today, because Australia was ringing America at 2 a.m. in the morning saying, you need to fix this. This part of the thing doesn't work properly. So you can thank the Australian Plenary Council for Teams to being better than it is today than it was in the past. Yeah, okay. So know the knowledge of how to discern. We already know from the spiritual exercises 3 times in making a good decision. And I don't need to go through those because some of you probably already know them better than I do. The 6th one, to be praying together. Praying together, okay? And you may need to do this beforehand. You certainly need to do it during the process. And we had slide was up there before. You need to pray before, and you need to pray during, and you need to pray after. Okay. So when in the 3 rounds of conversation, for example, you can't come to the spiritual conversation without having prayed on material beforehand. Or what I often say now is, because if you've got a mixed group that are non-Catholics, then I say, reflect or pray. So if you're not used to praying, then everybody knows how to reflect on things. But I always emphasise, also if you're reflecting and pray as well too, take note of what's happening inside. What are the movements there? That's one of the important things. So you pray at the beginning of the spiritual conversation, when you come to the conversation, and I always insist that in the spiritual conversation, in the first round, you start with this phrase, in my prayer. Start with in my prayer. It keeps you on track, okay? This is what happened in my prayer. We don't want to hear stories about the cake you baked last week. No. Or, your experience. No, what happened in the prayer on this particular topic. Second round, you start with, in the group I heard. So you're asking people, and this can be the tricky one, because oftentimes people start adding new information. No. What did you hear in that first round? Was there something common? Did you hear a theme being repeated? Or did you hear something that was a little bit out there, a little bit prophetic? So that's what you report back. So if you stick to those phrases, then you can get people on track. In the third round then, you can ask for more information. What did you mean by this? Or could you say a bit more about that? Or you could also add more information that you just had come to you as you're listening to other people. Okay. Next one. The conversation in the Spirit, and we've just been talking about that and the importance of how that plays out too. And as I was indicating earlier on this morning, your presence, your physical presence in that group is also speaking to the people in the group. So your demeanour, the look on your face, your posture when you're sitting there, or if, as I was saying before, if somebody says something and people around the table are nodding, right, then that is giving the game away a little bit in a sense, because it's giving approval to what is being said, which may be okay, but it can influence other people's speaking. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't sit there like a stone, but yeah, you need to be engaged. That's really important. Yeah, and to be, and they talk about intentional speaking and intentional listening. The listening thing becomes very important. Let me just give you a simple example. I was in George Street in Sydney one day, and I was going to have lunch with a friend of mine, and we agreed to meet at Town Hall, which is in the centre of the city. And so I'm walking up George Street, and as I'm walking up George Street, I see a young man pushing a wheelchair with a young woman in it. And the young woman had a peaked cap on, and she had it down over her face. So the first observation I made was, you don't want to be recognised. And then I thought, drug addicts. So I keep walking up the street, and I stop at a set of lights, and the guy comes up and he's alongside me, and he's got the wheelchair like that, and I could see the tracks up his arms. I said, yeah, typical drug addicts. So I walked on, and I'm standing in front of Town Hall minding my own business. And the next minute, the guy's standing in front of me, and he says, hey mate, can you give me a couple of bucks? Now, my community think I'm stupid because I always carry some gold coins in my pocket, because if somebody asks me directly, for me, that is Jesus. And how can I refuse to give to the Lord? So, hey mate, can you give me a couple of bucks? So I gave him a couple of gold coins, and he stood there and he looked at me and he said, God bless you. He said, I've walked up and down this street all morning, and you're the first person that's given me anything. And then he said it again, God bless you. And I stood there thinking, I have just been blessed by God, by somebody I thought very critically of. So I think in the whole discerning process, it's good if we can try to have that ear that listens for that voice that comes from God through other people. God speaks to us all the time through others. There was another funny time a Jesuit and I were having coffee together, and one of the guys that's in our parish is a street person. hangs around and he's a bit of a nuisance, whatever. And he came into the coffee shop one day and when this other Jesuit and I having coffee, and he stood alongside me and he said, God told me to tell you to give me $5. And I said, I can't tell you what God told me to tell you because it'd be too rude. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. Number 8. This is really important. The practice of the personal examine, the personal discernment in our lives. If this is not happening, then I don't think we can expect it to happen in the bigger group, in common. So I always encourage people, and I teach people in preparation for a discernment process to make sure that they are doing the examine. And how many years is it now? 50-something years as a Jesuit. My examine is just 2 questions, 2 things. I ask the Lord, what did you teach me today about myself, about others, and about the world? What did you teach me today? Remember Ignatian said God taught him like a schoolmaster? And then the second question is, Lord, how do you want me to respond? How do you want me to respond? So I think this is really important to kind of to make sure that the examiner is bedded down in the discernment process, the personal one as well as the bigger one you're engaged in. And then the last point here, and we've mentioned this already, to communicate to people how the final decision is made. Know and accept from the start how a final decision is to be made. So sometimes it rests with the local superior, the head of the ministry, the parish priest, or the bishop, or whatever. The final decision comes from that person. So therefore, that person has to be involved. Yep, has to be involved. And I think that is it.